My parents humiliated me at my own birthday party, laughing, "At least the cake is more successful than you." I left that night without paying their rent. One day later, the landlord changed their locks. I, 30 female, tried to have a peaceful birthday dinner with my parents after years of tension, but it completely backfired. They made a cruel joke about my life being a failure, and at the lowest moment, I snapped. I ended up leaving my own party, and when I returned home, I realized I couldn't keep financially supporting them anymore. I called the landlord, had their locks changed, and cut them off. Now they're furious, and I'm dealing with the fallout. Was I wrong for doing this? I've spent most of my life tiptoeing around my parents, Arthur and Mary. The kind of parents who are always too busy to listen, too tired to care, and too disappointed to show any real love. From a young age, I figured out that I wasn't their priority. They both came from difficult backgrounds, and instead of coming together to raise me in a loving home, they seemed to constantly fight each other's flaws. Their relationship was never healthy, and it showed in everything they did. Still, I always tried to make the best of it. Growing up, I never got the kind of attention that would make a child feel secure or wanted. The affection from my parents was like a rare commodity, offered only on their terms. Their expectations, on the other hand, were constant. But they never told me what those expectations actually were, so I spent most of my life trying to guess what would make them proud. For years, I'd been the one to keep everything running in their lives, financially, emotionally. Whenever they were short on rent, I'd step in. I made excuses for them when they hurt me with their words or their actions. I had always believed that maybe, just maybe, if I kept giving, they would one day see me. See me as their daughter. Not just as the one who picked up the pieces. When my 30th birthday was coming up, I figured it was the perfect time to try and bridge the gap. I'd spent months planning a dinner at my tiny apartment, something modest but heartfelt. I even went out of my way to bake a gorgeous, multi-layer red velvet cake that took hours of my time. It wasn't perfect, but I wanted it to be special. Maybe this year will be different, I told myself. Maybe they'll realize how hard I've been working and show up for me, just once. The dinner started off like any other night with them, strained and uncomfortable. My father, Arthur, was glued to his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. It had always been this way. He'd rather check his emails than talk to me. My mother, Mary, on the other hand, scanned the apartment like it was a reflection of my worth. She didn't approve of the decor, too cheap for her tastes, I guess. But she never hesitated to comment, no matter how much it stung. After an awkward meal, I brought out the cake. It was the one thing I was truly proud of, and I thought it would soften the mood. I lit the candles, wished myself happy birthday, and placed it on the table. But when I saw them barely glance at it, I should have known. Arthur blew out the candles with no enthusiasm. Mary barely even acknowledged the gesture. She took a long sip from her glass of wine before she looked at me and said, "Well, at least the cake is more successful than you." She laughed. Arthur, without skipping a beat, chuckled too. "Yeah, honestly. Look at that cake. At least it's going places." I froze. The words hit harder than anything they had ever said to me before. I'd grown used to their criticism, but this? This felt different. This wasn't just a comment about my life, it was a blatant dismissal of me as a person. I could feel my face getting hot, my breath coming a little too fast. I wanted to scream. To yell at them for all the years of neglect, for all the times I had been there for them and had never gotten anything back in return. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, my money for them, and this was the thanks I got? But instead of fighting, instead of confronting them, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I didn't care if they noticed. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked to the door. I didn't even look back. My parents were too shocked to say anything, and I didn't care to hear whatever they might have come up with. It was my birthday, and I had had enough. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't be there anymore. I drove around the town for what felt like hours, my mind racing with emotions I couldn't process. It wasn't just the comment they made, it was the years of putting up with them, of constantly trying to earn their affection, trying to prove my worth. It had all come crashing down in a single, careless moment. As I drove, something began to shift in my head. My parents had been relying on me for years. They couldn't keep up with their rent, and I'd quietly taken on the responsibility of paying it. I didn't mind at first. I thought, I'm their daughter, this is what family does. But now? Now I saw it differently. They never asked me for help, they just expected it. Expected me to always be there to fix their problems, without ever acknowledging how much it drained me. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. Not anymore. I couldn't be their financial crutch any longer. The idea of cutting them off didn't come to me immediately. But after a few hours of driving aimlessly, the thought hit me like a wave. I had been giving everything to them and getting nothing back. They had no respect for me, no understanding of what I had done for them. It wasn't just the birthday party. It was everything, the years of putting them first, of sacrificing my own life. And they treated me like a joke. I grabbed my phone, dialed the landlord, and before I could second-guess myself, I said, "Change the locks on the house." I didn't explain why. The landlord had seen the way my parents lived before. He knew how unreliable they were. And I knew this was the only way to make them realize something had to change. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with hesitation. "Yes," I said firmly. "Just do it." And he did. The next morning, the reality of what I had done started to hit me. My phone was flooded with missed calls and angry texts from both my parents. They didn't understand. They never would. I couldn't bring myself to listen to them. Not yet. Instead, I spent the day in my apartment, pacing around, feeling both a strange sense of liberation and overwhelming guilt. I had never done anything like this before. I had always been the one who fixed things, who kept the peace, even when it cost me everything. I was waiting for them to show up at my door. To beg for forgiveness or for an explanation. But they didn't. At least not immediately. When the landlord confirmed that they couldn't get into the house, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Part of me worried about the consequences. What if they never spoke to me again? What if they told everyone in town that I had abandoned them? The thought terrified me. But as much as I feared losing them, I also knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. It was only after a few days that I finally picked up the phone. "Charlotte, we need to talk," my father said. His voice was cold, but underneath it, there was an edge of desperation. "I'm not sure there's anything to talk about," I replied, my voice steady but distant. "Well, you've made your point," he said bitterly. "What do you expect us to do now?" "I expect you to figure it out. You've been relying on me for too long. I'm done." The conversation didn't go anywhere productive. It never does with my father. But I knew I had made my stand. And maybe, just maybe, they would finally realize that I was no longer the one they could take advantage of. I didn't expect an apology, but I did expect them to understand. If only a little. I couldn't say for sure if I was ready to cut ties entirely, but that night, for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet peace. The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty. My parents didn't come by. No visits, no calls, not even a simple text to ask if I was okay. It felt like they had withdrawn into themselves, the silence stretching between us like a vast chasm that neither of us seemed willing to cross. I knew they were angry, but what struck me was the lack of any effort on their part to reach out, no apology, no acknowledgement of their actions. Just cold indifference. For a few days, I took solace in the quiet. I spent more time in my small apartment, just trying to get my bearings. I reflected on everything that had led up to that moment, the years of putting myself last, the relentless effort I had made to keep a family together that had never really been a family. It was exhausting, and yet, for so long, I had thought it was my duty. But now, I was questioning everything. I tried to push the guilt out of my mind. The little voice that kept asking, was this too far? Was I too harsh? But each time I thought about the years of emotional neglect, of constant disappointment, the guilt didn't seem so heavy. My parents had used me for years, expecting, demanding, taking, and it felt like it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. A few days passed, and I went back to work, trying to keep my mind occupied. I had a decent job in marketing, nothing extravagant, but it paid the bills. Still, my head wasn't fully there. I found myself distracted, unable to stop thinking about the aftermath of what I had done. I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, my parents might never see what I had been going through. The truth of the matter was, they had always been wrapped up in their own world of disappointment and failure. They never really saw me for who I was, a daughter trying to make a life for herself while also caring for them. They had only ever seen what they wanted to see. It wasn't until a week later that I got a phone call from my mother. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on work, when my phone buzzed. It was her. I stared at the screen for a moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance, to avoid the emotional storm that was sure to follow. But I knew I couldn't keep running from it. I answered the phone, my stomach tight with anticipation. "Charlotte," my mother said, her voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." "I don't know if we do," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. "What's there to talk about, Mom? You and Dad never really cared about me, not the way you should have." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustling of something, maybe she was pacing, maybe she was gathering her thoughts. Finally, she spoke again, her tone softer. "Charlotte, I don't know how to say this, but, we're sorry." "I'm sorry. I know we haven't been the parents you needed, and we know we've hurt you." She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "But I don't want to lose you. I can't stand the thought of you walking away from us completely." I felt a twinge of something, relief, maybe? Or was it just disbelief? I had spent so many years wanting to hear those words, but now that they were here, I wasn't sure what to do with them. "I don't think you realize how much you've hurt me," I said, my voice quieter now. "All these years, I'd been there for you, helping, supporting you both when you couldn't even see me. And all I got in return was your disappointment. I'm not some punching bag for your frustrations." My mother's voice was almost a whisper when she replied, "I know. And I wish things were different. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. For you. For us." I let out a long breath, unsure of what to say. It felt too easy to just forgive, but I also knew that if I didn't at least try, I would never move on. The truth was, I didn't want to keep living with this weight on my shoulders. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to talk. I need to know that things can change before I can even think about coming back to you." "I understand," she said, and I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice. "But please, Charlotte, don't shut us out completely. I don't want to lose you." For the first time in what felt like years, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'm not shutting you out," I said. "I just need time." The days that followed were difficult. My father never called. It was almost as if he expected me to come crawling back, to apologize for cutting him off. My mother continued to reach out, her messages always filled with apologies and expressions of regret, but my father, Arthur, remained silent. I began to question whether my decision to cut them off had been the right one, but when I thought about how many times I had been left to pick up the pieces, the doubt faded. The silence from my father felt like his usual indifference, like he was hoping I'd forget everything and just go back to the way things were. But that was never going to happen again. Not without effort on his part. I continued to distance myself from them, taking it day by day. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about the years of neglect, I felt the anger rise in my chest. But then, in the quiet moments, I reminded myself why I had done it. I had finally chosen myself, for the first time in my life. A week later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in my father's familiar handwriting. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a simple note: "Charlotte, I don't know how to make up for the things I've done to you. I've been a terrible father, and I'll never be able to undo the pain I caused. But I want you to know that I see you. I see what you've become. And I'm proud of you. I can't promise things will change overnight, but I want to try." There were no grand apologies. No dramatic explanations. Just a simple acknowledgement. And for some reason, that felt more real than any apology he had ever given me. It wasn't the resolution I had expected. But it was a start. After reading the letter from my father, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was the initial shock, an apology from Arthur, a man who had never shown even a sliver of vulnerability. And yet, beneath it, there was something that made me hesitate. A part of me wanted to accept his apology, to allow him back into my life, but I also knew that I had to protect myself. He had always come up short when it mattered. His words, though kind, didn't erase the years of neglect, of humiliation. I wasn't ready to forgive him, not just yet. As the days passed, I kept the letter in my drawer, pulling it out occasionally to read it again. But something was different. I had taken control. The guilt that used to weigh so heavily on me had started to lift, piece by piece. I wasn't going to let them dictate my happiness any longer. But while I was trying to rebuild my life, they were in free fall. It was 2 weeks after the lock change when my mother finally called again. This time, I hesitated before picking up, knowing that her voice would be filled with emotion. "Charlotte," she said, her voice trembling. "Arthur and we've been talking. And I don't know how to say this, but we have no place to go. The landlord won't let us back in. We can't get into the house, and we don't have the money to fix it. We've lost everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I know this is what you wanted," she continued. "But we're sorry. We've made so many mistakes, and now we're paying for it. Please, Charlotte, we don't have anywhere else to turn. I don't know who else to ask." The guilt that had been growing inside me flared up, but I quickly reminded myself of what had happened. My parents had used me for years. They had taken without giving. They had never once shown me the love or respect I deserved. And now, they expected me to bail them out once again. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and steadied my voice before speaking. "Mom, I know you're scared. But I'm not responsible for you anymore," I said, my words firm, yet calm. "I gave you everything: money, time, support. You've never seen me, not really. And now, you want me to fix this? To fix what you and Dad have broken? No." There was a long silence on the other end. For the first time, I could hear the reality of my words sinking in. This wasn't going to be like the times before, where I caved and made things right for them. This time, I was standing my ground. "But we're your parents," she said weakly. "I know," I replied. "And you're my parents. But being family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice everything for you. I've sacrificed too much already. I'm not going to keep doing it." I could hear her struggling to hold it together, but I couldn't afford to give in this time. The emotional toll of my parents' manipulations over the years had been too much, and I wasn't going to let them continue using me as a fallback. After a long pause, she said, "I understand. I really do. But please don't shut us out forever." "I'm not shutting you out," I said. "But I can't keep enabling you. You need to figure this out on your own. I've done enough." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew it was the right thing. For once, I was putting myself first. It was the first time I'd done that in my entire life. Days passed, and the silence between us grew more unbearable. I heard from mutual acquaintances in town that my parents were struggling, that Arthur had been going to the local food bank and that they were living in a shabby motel room. They didn't have the money to rent another place, and the humiliation of it all was starting to take its toll. I felt a sick mixture of relief and guilt every time I heard news about them. On one hand, I knew they were reaping what they had sown, but on the other, I couldn't help but feel a tug of empathy. After all, they were still my parents. They were still the people who brought me into the world, for better or for worse. But then something changed. Something that finally allowed me to let go of the lingering guilt and move on completely. It happened one evening when I was at home, sitting on my couch and watching an old movie on TV. My phone buzzed, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a message from the landlord. The message read, "Just wanted to let you know that your parents have finally moved out of the house. They left this morning, without any explanation, just took their things and went. I changed the locks like you asked, and everything is in order." For the first time in a long while, I felt a rush of finality. They were gone. They had lost everything they had built on their own terms, and now, there was no going back. I wasn't responsible for them anymore. They had reached the consequences of their own actions, and I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. A few days later, I heard the final piece of the puzzle. My mother had been trying to contact me again. She left a voicemail, her voice strained and filled with emotion. I didn't call back. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was simply because I knew, deep down, that they had to face the reality of their choices. I couldn't keep bailing them out, couldn't keep playing the part of the dutiful daughter who was always there to fix everything. But I did send one last message, just to close the door on that chapter of my life. I've given you everything I could, and it's never been enough. I'm done now. I need to live my life, free from the weight of your expectations and manipulations. I hope you can learn from this, but I won't be a part of it anymore. I wish you well, but I can't be there to rescue you again. Not anymore. I didn't expect a reply, and honestly, I didn't need one. In that moment, I felt more at peace than I had in years. The months that followed were quieter. I focused on myself, my career, and my friends. I began to rebuild my life on my terms, without the heavy burden of my parents' demands. I even took a solo vacation for the first time in years, something I had never thought I could do. Every now and then, I would hear snippets of news about my parents, rumors about their lives, whispers of their struggles. But it no longer affected me the way it once had. I had let go of the guilt. I had taken control of my life, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly free. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't the reunion I had once dreamed of. But it was mine. And that, finally, was enough.